Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am thrilled to have a colleague in the studio audience today, and that's Gad Nestel, who is the uh, founder, the president of Monadnock Consulting. And Gad, I would describe him as a change agent. And I know sometimes that's an overused or an overworked term, but his entire career, I think what he's about to launch with Monadnock Consulting exemplifies this ability to be an effective change agent, to use his uh, um, awareness and his agency to help organizations transform and improve. So that's got to be right in line for everyone in our audience. Gad's been in the consulting world. He's been in the corporate world. I'll let him talk about that. And what he is offering in terms of services, in terms of thinking about how we make organizations better, are in the areas of team performance, executive coaching, leadership and team offsites, L&D, learning and development, design and facilitation, and organization development and effectiveness. So I'm really thrilled, Gad, that you're here. And why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, likewise, Mike. Mutual respect for many, many years, dating back, I think, to our Genentech days.
Ah,
My life story has been full of twists and turns. I'm a bit of a avid whitewater kayaker, and I think about my life as kind of going down a Class 5 river. I grew up living with my mom in a Buddhist temple in a little cabin without electricity and running water. I went to business school at Yale with a bunch of high performers. I attended the Naval Academy and was an athlete. And so I think the fact that I've ended up on your podcast, Mike, I can draw a direct line between experiences that all of which I just named put me in teams of passionate, committed, and capable groups of people that, while they were doing different things, depended on one another to accomplish change, to drive change. Whether it's the Buddhists trying to drive peace, whether it's teams trying to win sport, whether it's Annapolis trying to outcompete one another. That theme has been present in my life story for a long, long time. I
that's
would also,
great. Yeah, and I think that brings in the world of executive coaching, I think it's great to have a healthy sense of ego and who you are, and to be aware of your biases about how people and teams work, and to make them click. You reminded me of Genentech, which is really part of the ancient history story, and but fondly remembered. And I had a conversation with a two-time CEO, a former Genentech star, and as I reflected on my conversation, he sort of contacted me out of the blue, and that's often how it might happen. I later then read about his company and just how it was falling apart, and his current company, and how it's falling apart. And I thought to myself that people often, when I'm working with them or when I'm working with a team or an organization, are often in some period of transition. And I was so busy with the catching up on the old that I forgot to ask a lot about the current transition. And I was just wondering, how do you think about that? How do you think about teams in transition, executives in transition? You've seen a lot of that as a leader, Gad. So how do you help people in that regard?
yeah, look, I mean, one thing I didn't mention is I spent over 20 years designing and facilitating business simulations for a management consulting firm. And what we observed in just a compressed amount of time was, rapid change in what the team is experiencing together. I mean, they go through a life cycle in just a couple of days that take many teams years. And I think it's important to see distinctions in exactly what the team is trying to achieve. And therefore, when you're observing and maybe even coaching them, making sure that it's in support of that goal. And so not every team needs to be a creative, innovative team. Not every team needs to have you know, perfectly aligned roles and responsibilities. We might call that a team that's just in collaboration or in co-creation, or in coexistence. And so I think the life story of an individual, life story of a team is super important, but it's almost more important to be clear on what is the primary function and goals of that team, and is it fit for purpose. And I think, like a slow boiled frog, right? Like, sometimes the role that we play, Mike, is a speed bump in a leader or a team's day to get them to put on the brakes, think carefully about where they are and where they're going, and maybe change their org structure, change the composition of the team, at least change their ways of working so that it's more aligned to the purpose they're trying to accomplish.
I like that way of thinking about it is how a change agent can be a bump in the road, can be um, a stall, a catalyst, or something like that. And as you think about, 2025 is providing us with lots of examples about leadership in the political world, in the corporate world, and the exercise of everyday leadership. My earliest mentor, well, the person I identify as one of my earliest mentors, was a guy named Warren Bennis, who wrote a lot about leadership and had, back in the time when it mattered, number of New York Times best-selling books. He was president of a university, had a consulting career. And Warren once, maybe he wrote this as well, on the topic of leadership. Never has so much been written about so little. I think he was deeply cynical at that point. I mean, he did a number of things, with his work and his writing about leaders and leadership. Um, Interesting too. One of the institutions I've was been affiliated with, NTL, Warren had like a 47-page resignation letter. So
Mm.
interesting. But anyway, I digress. So, as that's all a way of introducing a topic. At is, what do you think some of the most interesting leadership trends are today?
Well, look, I mean, sadly, we're facing a trend. I have a government contractor who has a long list from the executive order of words to avoid. Um, Words like diverse or inclusion, psychological safety, and the pendulum has kind of swung wildly away from that being acceptable to their largest customer. What do we do with that trend, given that we know, Mike, at least you and I know, that psychological safety, inclusion, diversity, this isn't like just a word, it's actually an ingredient of a higher performing team, right? So that is certainly a trend. And how do we navigate the realities of some of our clients who are, you know, facing maybe high voltage wires with respect to the language they have used for many years to describe um, high performance teaming. Um, I would add to that, beyond just the words, there is a high degree of uncertainty in our future at a macro level, and uncertainty includes uncertainty about my own job. Right, so we've seen in the last couple of weeks layoffs at big firms, shutdowns, and that uncertainty almost always leads to a degree of A, voluntary attrition, and B, a lack of innovation. People are kind of reverting to playing it safe versus innovating. And so it has this compounded impact of causing people to freeze up and maybe shy away from exactly what they need more of, which is innovation to break through these uncertain times. So those are at least two macro trends, Mike, that even in the last couple of days and weeks, I have seen firsthand with my clients' teams.
I always sort of was fond of the guidance that the now deceased Charles Handy offered, and that was the most the biggest production of insecurity comes from the belief that you have a secure job. And if you believe that, um, so it is a way of, and in part, that's why I wrote the People Dividend, because I believe the advance of the gig economy, as people stitch together uh, jobs and livelihoods and careers in different ways. Organizations aren't seen or visualized or understood as I think I understood them, in the era of Rosabeth Moss Kanter and men and women of the corporation. I think and that's been in part because of COVID, which still seems to uh, persist. I mean, it's still one of the topics for HR in 2025. What does return to work mean? What does it mean for team culture? And these issues aren't resolved yet. So HR has looked a lot more or less like the same thing for the last couple of years. And I believe that, given that we have the erosion of middle management across the workforce, and again, at least according to Gallup, a continuing decline in employee engagement. I mean, hitting a sort of rock bottom again after several years of brief improvement. That it's a call for humanistic values, to remember to treat people with dignity, kindness, respect, to treat yourself with dignity, kindness, and respect. And this is, for me, the work that I do with leaders in helping them to increase trust, to exercise integrity, and to practice these humanistic values in order to create meaningful change. And that's the way in for me. That's what I think about in terms of the lucky work I'm able to do with um, developing leaders, C-suite leaders, and founders and CEOs. So that's what guides me is bringing these elements together in the service of meaningful change. If you were to extrapolate an approach, and you look, these things change, they develop, they grow. Well, what would that approach to executive development, leader development, organization development be?
Yeah, so I mean, as you introduced me, we started with kind of the team as the system that I spend the
Yes.
most time focusing on. And this isn't novel, but the way in which it's activated, I think, can be very different. And to me, number one, it's understanding exactly what type of teaming an organization or a team needs. So, for example, I worked in construction for a big part of my career, and a team that is responsible for building a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project is very much in execution. They plan the work and work the plan, and the level of coordination, the level of transparency is absolutely life. Life depends on it. I mean, there are life-threatening incidents that would occur and do occur because people aren't coordinating with one another. Versus, you mentioned a gig economy. I worked, with a big gig economy company, 2015, when they were creating new countries, they were adding new functions, and I famously remember one of my coachees missing a meeting because he had been arrested in Paris and was on the front page of a newspaper. Very, very different type of risk and appetite to risk. So it's number one, it's understanding the context that the team needs to operate on. And number two, the teams that you and I work with are almost always composed of exceptional people. They're great leaders, they're good people, they have integrity, they've had a track record of making successful decisions for a really long time. Yet, when you consider the individual performance of a team, like their 360s maybe, or what their team might say, their kind of team that they're looking down on might say about them is very different than what we see in the first team when they're working with one another. The relationships can be dysfunctional. And they're dysfunctional for different reasons, but whether it's through M&A, right? They're coming from different cultures. They've been brought in with a new CEO, and they have a deep relationship with the new CEO, but their culture fit with the legacy folks isn't there. And so my belief Mike, is that psychotherapy, behavioral, kind of coaching, to name these behaviors and create our transparency about the stories that we have is so essential to improving the relationships across a team that it deserves its own body of work, right? So I think there's a lot of team coaches that focus on the forming stages. There's some coaches that just work on the individual leader effectiveness. And I think the third leg of that stool that I spend a lot of time thinking about, I have a partner who's a marriage and family therapist in our business, is, what is the story between these two people who aren't collaborating effectively together? And how do we bring them into productive dialogue that allows for two stories to coexist and for alignment, or collaboration to begin to, pay dividends?
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. I've been sending out my newest book, The People Dividend, at colleagues, clients over the last couple of months. And I got a note back from a former client, someone I led a redesign of their research and development team for a big medical device company. And they said, "Oh," they said, "Oh, I've only gotten through the first couple pages," and that's all most people get through in a book. Um, and she said, "I really hear your voice in all of this," and I was grateful to hear that. And it's just to build on your point, Gad, about how relationships are so important. And yet, what I open the people dividend with is about isolation, or what the social psychologists might call enemy at work, and how, despite maybe doing your best efforts and your manager trying to do his or her or their best, I mean, eventually they're about managing their own career and doing their own thing. And I think there's just a letdown that a lot of people have in terms of what they can expect and gain from their manager, and some people don't care at all. And if we can do work that fills that void, so that people do care,
Yes.
uh, I think it makes for better organizational life. I don't know, and this is certainly the work that you would do with teams, right? I mean,
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
right.
The connection between individuals, should multiply exponentially, right? And so often people will say to me when I'm working with them, I have this great team. I wish I could just spend more time on the team, but I'm distracted by all this noise around me. And I think they're missing the opportunity to take that noise and turn it into creativity and problem solving and new connections. And so when I'm working with a team, we always start with purpose. Why am I here? What is my personal purpose? Because when we start to share our story about our personal purpose, all of a sudden, the commonalities actually rise up. The more human we become, the more shared, experiences and values we can see. And I think it's those belief systems that create walls between people and break the walls down, right? So I believe that I was coaching a couple of folks yesterday. One believes they should be focused on short term, the other focused on long term. Classic, kind of a business challenge. Someone else focused on revenue growth, another person on profitability. Another classic dynamic that I've seen. And the inability to see that paradox as one that is and instead of or, that my team that's designed for short-term wins can also benefit from insights and thinking longer term is so important. And a relationship that is dysfunctional can only see black and white, that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah, what I always think about in terms of relationships is that if they're not very solid, when issues do arise, they're likely to be eruptions. They're likely to be volcanic in nature. If you have a relationship that is sustained over time, then disagreements are likely to be handled in a different way. Maybe that conflict creates a different solution, or creates out of that conflict you find some accord. And I also think that these relationships change over time. And that's why it's so important to think about the role of executive coaching over time. Um, is it ever really, is there a fix for something? Uh, but what happens when you have a long term relationship that goes south? Is it a change in direction? Is it a change in um, method, procedure, however you want to think about it, that creates this need to, think about, to be conscious of your work, and perhaps to treat that work as an object every once in a while that you
Mhm, mhm.
or that you can make some creative use of, that you can dissect in some ways to understand it and to use your agency in a different way.
Look, I mean, I think we all wear lenses. We wear color lenses, and I think the responsibility of a coach is to help see things through another lens, right? And
Yeah.
I name my company Monadnock because I see this mountain through the four seasons of New England, from snow to fall, which is beautiful, to summer and spring when the leaves are sprouting and the maple sugar operations are running. And I think part of my responsibility with the team is to help them see this evolution over time of what has changed so that they
Hmm.
avoid using the status quo or inertia to drive tomorrow's decision. And I think change ready organizations, and you describe me as a bit of a change agent, are appreciating what has got them there and investing heavily in, you know, the 3, 6, even 12 months out to say, what do we need to change in terms of our people, our ways of working, our priorities, so that, we're more competitive, more agile, more effective in the coming months. The future has never played out in the past, right? It's unique to today, which requires ingenuity and collaboration. And if we treat relationships, if we treat our work as something that is full of expertise built over decades, right? We run the risk of trying to repeat history. And I think effective leaders, effective teams have a degree of humility that appreciates that the toolkit that they need to employ moving forward necessarily needs to be really different. And my role as the coach is, and working with the team is to help them see what those pivots can unlock, as opposed to let people entrench in these divisions of belief systems based on many, many years of proven success using that model, and let some of that go.
Yeah, and I think certainly one of the issues, we always deal with in change is loss and how that occurs. Um, as Bill Bridges used to say, it's never that we're so in love with the past that we can't let go of it, or so afraid of the future that we can't embrace it. It's the period in between, transition. And that's maybe where we started. I was also thinking about, our earlier comment about diversity. And I recall writing an article maybe about 12 months ago. And the editor of a big HR publication, learning development big, um, said we need to take out inclusion from the proposed title because it doesn't sell well. And then today, as I was out, sort of for some exercise, I'm scrolling a little bit um, through my email, and I saw a caption for an article. It's why did diversity become a bad word? And I refused to read it because I said, well, maybe it's because of white men, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. And it's this again, fear of loss. What don't I have? And so much of that has to be healed, I think, in our workplaces. And when I wrote my first book, Integrity by Design, Working and Living Authentically, people used to ask me, "Oh, is it okay to tell a lie as a manager?" And I'd say, I don't know. I'm not your rabbi. I'm not, any of this stuff to you. You figure it out. But what I do know is that, you know, once trust diminishes in a team, it's hard to recover. You can do a lot, but it takes a long time to recover. And I think this is the rebuilding period. This is why we're so in need of kindness and dignity and respect in the workplace, so that we can begin a process to, um, regenerating organizations. Gad, if people wanted to get in touch with you, if they wanted to be in touch with you, how would they do that? I mean, how would they seek out your work? How would they seek out your services?
Yeah, I'd say, go to, you can track me down on LinkedIn. Monadnock LLC has a web page. Reach out to me directly via email. I would love to learn people's own experiences with their teams.
Mm.
I have a little bit of a playbook that I can offer quickly. That doesn't cost anything. But I think, as you and I both appreciate, Mike, sometimes being reminded of the simple things can go a really, really long way. And Yeah, super excited to kind of bring my 20 plus years of experience across all these different work environments, client contexts, into a point of view and an approach that can really help teams evolve and move forward with that perfect blend of humility and confidence, and maybe what you would describe, Mike, as integrity.
Oh, that's great. And we'll have all of that in the show notes. So if you want to catch up with that, just check out the show notes today. And I think, Gad, you provide so many interesting um, approaches at assessment, individual, organizational lenses, and this ability to help leaders and their groups with culture and strategy and acceleration. That's also awesome. So I want to thank you, Gad, for being a guest on People Dividend. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure. Appreciate the many investments we've made in our friendship and following each other over the years.
yeah, I'm so I usually don't use the podcast for this purpose, but so happy to promote Gad and his new business. So um, take a look at the show notes. You'll find ways to get in touch with Gad. And until the next episode of People Dividend, stay well.